Snow fell heavily outside the small roadside diner, the dim streetlights casting a golden glow on the swirling flakes in the cold winter night. Jack, a single father, sat quietly in a corner, his tired eyes fixed on the cup of coffee growing colder before him. He had no idea that a simple act tonight, a meal he silently paid for an elderly stranger on this freezing night, would change his life forever. And then, within just a few short minutes, a secret buried for decades would be uncovered. A truth that, had he known earlier, might have kept him from ever stepping into this diner tonight. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. While waiting for his food, Jack happened to notice an old woman sitting in the corner of the diner. She wore a worn-out knitted sweater, her hands trembling as she flipped through the menu. When the waiter arrived, she forced a faint smile, ordered a cheap cup of tea, then quietly folded the menu back as if she didn't dare to ask for anything more. Watching this, Jack felt something tighten in his chest. Without overthinking, he called the waiter over and discreetly paid for her meal. When the waiter brought out the food, the old woman's eyes widened in shock. "Did you pay for my meal?" she stammered. Jack offered a small smile. "Please, enjoy. It's nothing much." The old woman stared at Jack for a long moment, her deep eyes searching for something. Then suddenly, she reached out and gripped his hand tightly, her voice trembling. "Are you
Evelyne Esson?"
Jack froze. That was his mother's name. The woman he had lost more than a decade ago. You knew my mother?" Jack asked, his heart pounding. The old woman fell silent for a moment before tears welled up in her eyes. "I didn't just know her. I was the one who caused her a lifetime of pain." Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, silent and steady, just like the secret slowly unraveling. Jack felt his chest tighten at the sound of that name, Evelyn, his mother's name. He looked at the old woman in front of him, trying to piece together the fragments of confusion in his mind. "What did you just say?" His voice was hoarse. The old woman swallowed hard, guilt filling her eyes. I've been searching for you for years. There's something you need to know." Jack hesitated. A part of him wanted to stand up and walk away immediately. But something, an unexplainable feeling, held him back. "Who are you?" he finally asked. The old woman sighed and pulled out a worn photograph from her coat pocket, placing it on the table. When Jack looked down, his breath caught in his throat. In the picture was his mother, Evelyn, and a man he had never seen before. "Who is this man?" Jack's voice was tense. The old woman looked at him deeply, then slowly said, "He's your father." The world seemed to spin around Jack. All his life, his mother had never spoken of his father. He had always believed the man had abandoned them before he was even born. "But now, you're lying." Jack shot up from his seat, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The diner fell silent, a few people turning to look. But he didn't care. The old woman remained seated, her eyes never leaving him. "You have a small scar on your left shoulder, don't you?" Jack froze. How did she know? "When you were little, you fell while playing on the balcony. I was the one who carried you inside while your mother frantically called for an ambulance," the old woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "I am the mother of the man in that photo. I am your grandmother." This time, Jack couldn't refute her words. But if this was true, why had his mother never spoken of it? Why was she only seeking him out now? His heart pounded, a sinking feeling creeping into his chest. There was something else, something even darker, hidden beneath all of this. He clenched his fists, struggling to keep his voice steady. If he was my father, then where is he? A heavy silence hung in the air. Then, the old woman let out a shaky breath, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "Your father is dead. But he never abandoned you. He spent his whole life searching for you." Jack felt his entire body go numb. "That's impossible." His voice was barely a whisper. The old woman's hands trembled as she pulled out another piece of paper, an old letter, the handwriting shaky and uneven. She slid it across the table to him. "Before he passed, this was the last thing he left for you." Jack swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he picked up the letter. As he unfolded it and read the first few lines, Tears welled up in his eyes. My son, if you are reading this, it means I never got the chance to see you one last time. I made mistakes. I caused your mother so much pain. But you must know, I never gave up on you. I love you more than anything in this world. The words blurred before Jack's eyes. His hands trembled as he clutched the letter, his chest tightening with an ache he had never felt before. For years, he had lived with hatred toward a man he believed had never cared. But now, the truth was far from what he had always thought. Outside, the snow continued to fall. But inside Jack, a storm raged. The next morning, Jack couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. He had spent the entire night rereading his father's letter, his heart a tangled mess of emotions. After much internal struggle, he decided to follow the old woman's instructions and visit the address she had given him. It was an old house on the outskirts of town, its small garden covered in snow. When Jack knocked on the door, a middle-aged woman answered. Her eyes widened in surprise as she looked at him. You are Evelyn's son? Jack nodded, feeling a lump rise in his throat. The woman let out a sigh and stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. I was your father's private nurse. I cared for him in his final years. Jack sat down quietly, his heart pounding. The woman poured him a cup of tea before she began to speak, her voice slow and deliberate. His father, Richard, had never abandoned them. He had loved Evelyn deeply, but his wealthy family had refused to accept a woman of humble background. When Evelyn became pregnant, Richard had been forced to leave, sent abroad by his family to cut all ties. But he never stopped searching. When he returned, he spent years looking for Jack and his mother. However, out of fear that Richard would take her son away, Evelyn had gone into hiding. She even changed their names, ensuring they would never be found. Richard had only learned the truth when it was too late. By the time he discovered Jack had grown up without him, illness had already ravaged his body. He had spent his final years consumed by regret, longing for just one chance to see his son. He always carried your photo, and every night he would whisper your name. The woman's voice trembled. Until his very last breath. Jack felt his entire body turn to ice. For years, he had hated a man he had never truly known. But in the end, that man had suffered a pain no less than his mother and himself. Jack returned home, his heart in turmoil. He needed answers from his mother, the woman he loved most, yet the one who had hidden such a crucial part of his past. The next day, he drove to the cemetery where his mother had rested for the past 10 years. Snow fell gently, covering the simple gravestone that bore the name Evelyn Carter. Jack knelt down, placing his hand on the cold stone. Mom, why did you hide this from me? He whispered. There was no answer, only the wind rustling through the trees. Jack closed his eyes, memories of his mother flooding back. Her long days working 2 jobs to raise him, the night she held him when he was feverish, the way she smiled despite the sadness in her eyes. I don't blame you. But Mom, I wish I had known sooner. Snow continued to fall silently over Evelyn's grave. Jack stood there for a long time, his heart filled with conflicting emotions. The past he had believed in had shattered, leaving behind an emptiness that could not be filled. But if his mother had hidden the truth for so long, could there be more secrets yet to be uncovered? Jack clenched his father's letter tightly, determination hardening in his eyes. He couldn't stop here. He needed to know everything. That night, Jack returned to his small apartment. He dug through old papers, searching for any clue about his parents. Then he found it, a small worn wooden box buried deep in a drawer, one his mother had never allowed him to touch. With a strange sense of foreboding, Jack opened it. Inside were old, yellowed letters. They weren't from his father. The handwriting was completely different. But as he read the words, his heartbeat pounded so hard it nearly suffocated him. Evelyn, if you don't listen, you know what will happen. Don't be foolish. Don't let him find you and the boy. Beneath the letter was a photograph of a man Jack had never seen before. His face was sharp, his eyes cold and piercing, as if they could see straight into one's soul. A chill ran down Jack's spine. Who was this man? And why had his mother been so terrified that she had hidden him from his own father? Unable to sit still, Jack immediately sought out his grandmother, the only person who could explain everything. When he arrived, the old woman seemed to have been expecting him. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked slowly. "Who is the man in the photo?" Jack nearly growled. His grandmother sighed, sorrow filling her gaze. Then, she told him the story he should have known long ago. Years ago, it wasn't just Richard's wealthy family that had torn his parents apart. There was another figure, a dangerous one. Richard's younger brother. A man who had always coveted the full inheritance and refused to accept Jack's existence. He had threatened Evelyn, forcing her to leave Richard and take Jack far away. If she didn't, neither of them would have lived to see another day. A storm raged in Jack's mind. He had believed his mother hid the truth out of selfishness. But in reality, she had done it to protect him from a ruthless man. "Is he still alive?" Jack asked, his voice shaking with fury. His grandmother remained silent for a long moment before answering. "I don't know. But if you've uncovered this, then you may have already drawn his attention." Jack froze. A sense of unease crept into his chest. And that feeling quickly turned into reality. 2 days later, when Jack returned home in the evening, he noticed something was off. His apartment door wasn't locked. His heart pounded. He was certain he had locked it before leaving. Clenching his fists, he pushed the door open. His apartment was ransacked. Papers were scattered everywhere, drawers were pried open. But the most terrifying thing of all, a small note placed right in the center of his table. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Jack felt his breath grow heavy. He knew he had unknowingly stepped into a battle he wasn't prepared to fight. But now that he was in it, there was no turning back. The problem was, who was he? And where was he? Jack knew only one person could help him, the nurse who had cared for his father. That very night, he drove to her house. But when he arrived, his blood ran cold. The door was broken. The furniture was overturned. And the nurse was gone without a trace. Beside a shattered mirror on the floor was a streak of blood. Jack knew he had already made his move. And this was a direct message to him. But that only fueled Jack's determination. If this man thought he could intimidate him with these tactics, he was sorely mistaken. Jack swore that no matter the cost, he would uncover the truth. And this time, no one could stop him. He rushed to his car, his mind racing with countless theories. Someone had been watching his every move, knowing he would seek out the nurse, and had struck before Jack could do anything. But what was his true purpose? A mere warning? Or something far worse? Jack's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "It's too late, Jack. Don't let this go too far." His heart clenched. Jack took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He wanted him to be afraid, wanted him to stop. But this only strengthened Jack's resolve. He left the scene but didn't go home. If he had broken into his apartment once, he could do it again. Jack needed a safer place to think, one location that made sense. His father's old family estate. Jack drove through the night, the empty road illuminated only by dim streetlights casting eerie shadows on the barren trees. This place stirred vague childhood memories, memories he had never fully understood. His mother had never spoken much about his father, and Jack had never set foot on the estate. But now, it was the only place he could find answers. As Jack pulled up to the gate, silence enveloped him. The old wooden house stood in the middle of an overgrown field, moonlight washing over its decayed roof. He stepped out, the winter air biting at his skin. The door was unlocked. Jack's pulse pounded as he pushed it open. Inside, dust and cobwebs covered everything, yet remnants of a life once lived here remained. The old books on the shelf, a worn-out armchair, a faded family portrait hanging on the wall. But what caught Jack's attention the most was a faint glow coming from a room in the corner. Someone was here. Jack moved forward cautiously, his heart thudding in his chest. He pushed the door open and froze. An older man sat in the center of the room, his piercing gaze locking onto Jack. "Hello, Jack." The deep voice sent a chill down his spine. Jack instinctively took a step back, his hands clenching into fists. This man, he was the one from the photograph. The one his mother had fled from. Surprised. The man smirked, but his eyes remained cold. I knew you'd find your way here. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Who are you? The man chuckled softly. You already know, Jack. I'm Richard's brother, the one who was meant to have it all. Jack's blood ran cold. The man shook his head, a flicker of exhaustion crossing his face. No, Jack. It wasn't me. It was our family. They didn't want your father to marry your mother. They refused to accept you. But they didn't want me to have everything, either. And when your father died, they took everything from me. Jack stared at the man, trying to grasp every word. They forced your mother into a corner, Jack. They made her run. But she didn't realize she could never run forever. Rage surged through Jack's veins. You threatened my mother. You destroyed my family. The man let out a slow sigh, then stood up, taking measured steps toward Jack. Jack, do you think I did all of this for money? His eyes glowed in the dim light. No. I did it because I couldn't afford to lose what should have been mine. And neither can you. Jack took a step back, his fists clenching instinctively. What do you want? The man stopped just inches from him, his gaze piercing deep. You are the last of this bloodline, Jack. The only one who can reclaim what was rightfully ours. Jack froze. I can help you. The man continued, his voice eerily calm. But you have to choose. Stand with me, or lose everything. A cold wind swept through the room, making the oil lamp on the table flicker. Jack stared into the man's eyes, a storm of emotions raging inside him. His chest tightened. He had come here searching for the truth, but instead, he had walked into a deadly game. If he agreed, he might uncover every secret he had been searching for, but at the cost of stepping onto a path with no return. If he refused, he had no idea what awaited him. Jack tightened his fists, took a deep breath, and met the man's gaze. I won't stand with you. I don't need your secrets if it means betraying myself. The man's face remained impassive, but Jack saw a flicker of danger in his eyes. Then you've made your choice. His voice was steady as he reached into his coat, pulled out an envelope, and placed it on the table. This is your final answer. But once you open it, there is no turning back. Jack stared at the envelope for a long moment before picking it up. He wasn't afraid of the truth. The only thing he feared was regretting not seeing this through to the end. He left the room, stepping into the silent night. The cold wind lashed against him, but his heart burned with determination. Jack returned to his apartment. Under the dim yellow light, he opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of old documents and a photograph, a picture of his mother. But standing beside her was not his father. It was him. Jack's chest tightened. He flipped through the papers, financial records, cryptic letters, and then he saw it. His birth certificate. The man he had always believed to be his father wasn't. Jack went numb. All these years, he had lived a lie. His mother hadn't just run to protect him from Richard's family. She had run to hide him from the man who had threatened her. The man who had forced her to choose between life and death. And now, he had found him. A sharp pain stabbed through Jack's chest. He couldn't believe it. He had come so far in search of the truth, only to realize the truth was what hurt the most. He gripped the paper tightly in his hand. Mom did everything to protect me, but I couldn't protect her. For the first time in years, Jack broke down in tears. A few days later, Jack quietly visited his mother's grave alone. He stood still before the headstone, his fingers tightening around the half-burned letter. Ashes swirled in the wind, the last remnants of paper carried away, disappearing into the silent night. He had traveled a long road in search of the truth, unraveling the mysteries of his past. But now that everything had come to light, Jack realized that some truths were not meant to be kept, because they only brought pain. He placed a white flower on the cold stone. Mom, I understand now. His voice trembled slightly, but there was no more anger, no more despair. Only peace remained in his heart. You spent your whole life protecting me, keeping me from living in fear or hatred. But I was so consumed with chasing the past that I forgot what truly mattered, the road ahead. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the cold wind sweep through his hair, carrying with it the breath of winter. He had once believed he needed revenge, that he had to face the man who had destroyed his mother's life. But now, he understood. The only thing his mother ever wanted was for him to live, to be free from the chains of the past. The past few months had changed him forever. He was no longer the man who sought the truth just to fill the void in his heart. Because in truth, his heart had never been empty. It had always been filled with the love his mother left behind. Jack bowed his head one last time, then turned to leave. His shadow stretched long under the fading glow of the setting sun, blending into the winds that carried the whispers of a new beginning. No matter how painful the past had been, no matter how deep the wounds, he still had the power to choose his own path. And today, he chose to move forward. Jack chose to walk the path his mother had always wished for him. A path with no hatred, no secrets, only freedom.